Hey there, lovely people. Welcome back to another Story Study Saturday. I'm Sammy, and I'm a writer who likes to learn about writing through reading and share what I learn with you. This week, I want to talk to you about Red Queen by Victoria Aveyard. And I read this book a while ago, outlined the video, and now I'm just sitting down to record it, and I am taking the time to research the people behind the books that I am platforming on this channel. And I saw some people on TikTok saying that Victoria Aveyard is on the wrong side of things, to say the minimal. There will be more in the caption about why I feel like there is some miscommunication on that account. I did a lot of digging into her as a person and her internet presence, and it seems like somebody said this one time and now it's just being circulated around. So if you are concerned about that, you can take a look at what I found in the description below and come to your own determinations about it. I feel that I'm comfortable with making this video, so if you're comfortable with watching it, let's continue. Going into the story, I definitely came in with my expectations way higher than they probably should have been. I thought that this was a duology and not like a whole series. I thought there were only 2 books, so that could have led to some of my expectations being different from what the actual book had in store to present. But that's just on me because I assumed that I knew what the story was, but I did not. So in case you aren't familiar with Red Queen, it's like super popular and a lot of people have read it, so you probably are, but here is my summary of the story. Your blood determines the life you are destined to live. Silver blood means you are strong, born with special powers that set you apart and require you to be the dominant race. Or red, which means you are nothing, and you are born to live a life of servitude, to keep working for the Silvers, or to go to fight for what the Silvers think they deserve. But what happens if you don't fit either? So let's get into my thoughts on this one. I think that the world building was done incredibly well in that it's tangible, where I can see in my mind what the stilts look like and where Mare's from, what kind of gritty, depressed society that creates, and see how that looks in my mind from the descriptions given, as well as the palace and how drastically different those things are, and just like the cross between the stilts and the neighborhood around the palace that Mare's sister goes in to sell some of her stuff at. You can kind of feel the difference in terms of how the setting changes. And I think that that's super important for these kinds of stories where the divide is the important part. You have to kind of create that experientially through the surroundings as well as through the character interactions. And I think this does that really, really well. I also think that the conflict builds at a really good pace. In fantasy books where there are a lot of things going on, there's a lot of like politics and magic systems and worlds that are not directly aligned with our real world experience, it's harder to make the pacing of the conflict adjust well with the amount of plot and exposition you have to understand to really grasp on to what the conflict is. And I think that this builds the conflict at just the right pace between what we know as readers and what we understand about the world and what the characters are going through. So in terms of how many moving parts there are, once a moving part clicks into place, you start to get more added to that conflict. So you're building your understanding of the world as the conflict is rising at the same time. I think that's a really unique way of looking at building a conflict from a fantasy world. And along with that, it kind of leads to these clues that fall into place when they're meant to, but they're still there even though they're not quite in place clicking together. That leaves you as a reader, it left me as a reader feeling like so frustrated with the fact that I didn't see that clue the first time it was left there. And this constant feeling of like, well, I have to get the next one before it tells me what the next one is. And that just sort of drives you in further into keeping up with the momentum of the story, your drive to know what's going to happen before it happens. It just leads to that perfect momentum driver between the story and you as a reader, keeping it moving. On to what I think could have been improved about the story. I think that there's a lot of telling that's done in terms of how Mare has relationships with people, and it creates a disconnect between what interactions Mare actually has with people and what we're told that those interactions are supposed to feel like. We aren't really shown how her relationships build. We're just sort of told that they have built. And in terms of the relationships that we can see, it feels very disconnected because you're like, I don't really understand what's going on here with that. Like when time passes, we're just told that a relationship gets better and we don't actually see the progress of it, especially with Hal, Julian, and Killorn. I think the only relationship that you actually see grow is with Maven, and I think that that creates a new sense of conflict later on because it's the only one that has any legs to stand on from what the reader is actually given during the story. They're only shown that one relationship and they're told that the other ones also had growth. So it creates like this level of distrust in the relationships that are supposedly getting stronger, but we haven't seen anything from them. This is going to be a little bit confusing and kind of vague. I feel like we were given a lot of motivation for a very small amount of things, a very small amount of actions and conflicts, and I feel like we were given no motivation for a lot of situations and actions, which led to me feeling like there was a lot of missed stakes and potential for tension in those high stakes that we weren't able to get just because we were missing the motivation behind it. The reason that the characters cared was just not there. So we just had to go into it like, this is a thing that's happening, I guess. And I wish that there was more information on why we're doing the things that we're doing, what's driving them to do it. And the love triangle made me kind of uncomfortable because of the other two things that I said could be improved, because it was very unclear on why there was a love triangle, how relationships were developing, and also, is it a triangle or is it bigger than that? I'm very, very confused. And there's so many things that just needed a little bit more to make it feel like I'm not against a love triangle in the grand scheme of things. I think that they're like very overdone in YA especially, but I don't not enjoy them. It just like, it didn't sit right because it was missing things. And that led to like a little bit more discomfort than I would have loved to have with that. Because I'm not against it. I'm not against it if it is motivated properly, but I just don't understand. So what do I think writers can learn from this story? Obviously, I think it's a really good example of world building. I think it's got a lot of aspects to the world building, the like physical descriptions of things and the emotional impacts of those physical descriptions on the character. I think it does a really great job of. I think it's also a good example of how to make a war a part of a story, but not necessarily the story. A war takes place in this world, but it's not necessarily like the thing that is driving all of the characters into whatever their actions are. It's kind of a backup motivation. It's a fear driver more than it is like, oh, we have to do X, Y, and Z for the war. It's not the main thing that the characters are worried about. There are other things that are going on, and it's sort of like an underlying hum to their thought processes and their forces to go through what they're doing. In terms of things that writers can learn, because this doesn't do that in the full effect, is like paying attention to your relationship dynamics. What is your main character's relationship with their family? What is their relationship with their best friend? What is their relationship with their potential love interest? What is their relationship with any kind of negative interaction? So like in this case, it would be Mare and the royal family. How do all of those dynamics change for the person? And how can you show them, even if it's not in large time frames, but in frequent quantities, so you know what those relationships look like? They're not like me and getting confused by what exactly is going on with these characters for this duration of time. Why are they suddenly friends, you know? And also keeping track of where the cause is to the effect. Because if you know where you want your story to go, you know the characters need to go from A to B. They need to get to B because B is where all of these things are happening for the plot. What is drawing your character to go from A to B? Whether that's a physical place, an emotional place, a conversation, any kind of action that needs to drive the plot has to come from something from your characters to feel like it's motivated. And having motivation makes it a lot easier to pay attention to what's going on in the story as a reader, because you know where the characters are coming from. You know why they're doing what they're doing. You're on a trip with them because you're empathizing with what they're drawing themselves to do, what they're motivating themselves to do, where they're coming from. I have to go save this thing because my mom loved whatever. Having that cause to the effect is super important for making things feel cohesive, even if they might not make sense logically or make sense for the character in terms of what their interpersonal goals are or their general, like, I want to be in this area kind of goals. Anything that puts them in an emotional position that can lead to a motivation to do something else, that's your cause. And having that makes it so much easier to get your characters to do things. And it doesn't have to be anything big, it just has to be something that is clear to your readers. And I think that this book would have benefited a lot from more of that. So keeping that in mind of like, does my character have a reason to do this is gonna be great. But that is all that I've got for you today. So if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. It'll really help me out and show YouTube that maybe other people would enjoy this video as well. If you don't want to miss any of my uploads, hit that subscribe button with the notification bell next to it. I put out a video every week, either a story study video like this or a writing topic video on Tuesdays. And if you've got any book recommendations, please let me know in the comments and I will check them out. But I will see you guys next week.